Welcome to Philly Coco Presents Side Project Spotlight, episode 38. This is a developer's journey into making cool stuff. I'm Kotaro.
I'm Steve.
And I'm Aaron.
And we are Philly Coco, a Philadelphia-based Coco Heads community focused on Apple development. That primarily, but not exclusively, means iOS, Mac, tvOS, and watchOS development. Philly Coco's true desire is to take you higher on your own developer journey. Whew. All right.
Nice.
We're getting better. We're getting at a point where this becomes automatic with these intros.
Yeah. And the errors are less.
Yeah. But so welcome back. We are in the middle of the non-beta period of iOS development, so we can actually focus on building our stuff, as well as in the work environment, for myself at least. Just for context, for anyone who hasn't listened to this podcast, we like to build side projects on this project. The title hasn't been explicit enough. Just because part of the motivation about Philly Coco in general was people originally had come to Philly Coco to sort of work on their own thing and sort of get advice, get help with, bug fixes, app development, design advice, that kind of thing. That's generally how Philly Coco was founded, and that was kind of during the close to the kind of like the gold rush period when app development became a thing. I think nowadays it's tough because nowadays the people who come generally are trying to get into app development in more of a job opportunity sort of way. It's kind of like, but they don't know how to start. And sometimes part of starting is getting into just building things, building apps, building projects. So that's kind of the thing we have encouraged, and this podcast is sort of an extension of that, to encourage you to build things, and then hopefully you can kind of build up your portfolio, build up your skill level to a point where then the jobs will just start flowing in. That's not always the case, but at least you have something.
Jobs start flowing in.
That never happens, by the way.
Spoken like an ex-consultant.
I mean, that's sort of the funny part. Like, recruiters almost gatekeep at this point. It's like, do you have an app on the App Store? And then you're just struggling to be like, to prove that you have the proper experience to build an app.
So the one we are currently working on, slowly but surely, was codename PickleJarTodo, which is like a habit tracking app, and there's been a lot of them coming out recently. So we're on the right track. It's really late, as usual. but I guess the update for that is primarily going to come from Kotaro this week, because he's the only one who did some significant work on it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the PickleJar app, which is a habit forming app,
or a habit tracker app.
Habit tracker app, yeah. So one of the challenges was the UI, and I think we built a sketch.
It's like the most unique thing about because habit tracking apps are everywhere, but the vision of the UI we had was a little bit different than the norm, and so.
Yeah, I guess I think when it's tough because it's like the UI expectation for. Sometimes when you build a multi-platform app, because originally we wanted to make this a Mac, iPad, iPhone app.
Yeah, we just reduced our scope
significantly to just iPhone and iPad. Yeah. But I think the idea was like each would have a certain close but not quite the same UI, because depending on which platform you're on. Yeah. So like if you're on the iPhone, you kind of want to just figure out like what you've done for the day and then move on. Like
it's kind of like the way OmniFocus used to be. Like over time, they've added more and more features to make the iOS version much more full featured. But I do remember, if I remember correctly, like the iPad and the Mac version, the iOS version used to be pretty different, and like you could do certain things on one platform and not on another platform. I think, if I remember correctly, like that's kind of how we were thinking about it.
Yeah,
maybe that's not the way you should think about modern apps anymore, but the screen sizes make a difference, though, in what you are trying to accomplish.
it goes back to like what is the higher priority in terms of like making it easier for developers to maintain the code, right? Or to be scalable for whatever, if you're targeting enterprise, maybe that's not the priority of like making something that's very catered to each particular platform, right? So like the iPhone, in my mind at least, the iPhone was very good for like quick like review, swipe, just like, okay, done. Yeah, I did this, I didn't do that, I did this, I didn't do that. The iPad, you can be a little more introspective about it. Maybe you want more charts and dashboards. Maybe you want to take notes with your Apple Pencil, that kind of stuff. In the Mac, it's much more like you have much more actionable controls of what you might want to do with the data that you've collected, right? So maybe you might want to build a report or build a chart or do much more complex interactions with your data. So I think that was my initial thought. So getting back to
it doesn't mean we can't do that, but we're trying to get
that's
basic iPhone out, and
that's the 10-foot vision. But
in the vein of that, so
vision.
What is what's in the latest branch?
Mm-hmm. So the latest branch, so we kind of created a Tinder-like swipe gesture for the user to sort of intentionally decide whether they did the habit of the day or not. So swipe left for no, swipe right for yes, same mechanic. And for the longest time it was, I don't know, I had like a sort of like a what's that block, a mental block about it, and a lot of it was due to the AP, sort of like the sample code that I was relying on, just didn't quite fit the context of what I needed. I think it was trying to do too much, and I think I didn't want it. I wanted to like strip it back down to something I can manage, as well as like it's something that was supported. I still might want to customize it over time, and maybe because I brought it from another, like something called I brought it from another. I started using Swift Packager Management to like test a few different open source varieties, because I got to a point where like I didn't want to bother with customizing the UI. I just want to get something working in a way that makes sense, so that we can just continue focusing on the overall UI experience, because the card component is just one component of the overall view of what I was working with. And then so I did that, and that worked great. But then there was this row below it. This kind of introduces like a whole different problem, because the way we sort of did it was that we were just going to get the goal of all the goals for that day of the sprint. But in our app, we at least, for now, we haven't set up an onboarding system we have onboarding views, but we haven't set up an onboarding system to predefine a sprint. So the goals don't know that a sprint exists in my sample app. So it's an overall UX question of like whether or not the sprint is a priority, or whether we just default everyone to a default sprint and then allow them to change over time, right? So I think this is where because in core data we're just pulling all the goals or right now, at least at this sort of phase, we're just pulling up goals just to see we can pull up goals of the day. But now we have to actually like architect it in a way of like, okay, well, now we need to pull up all the default goals that haven't been like defined as like yes or no's, right? Of like, did you do it or did you not do it for the day? And then bring a row of all the goals in your sprint that's already there. So your sprint is actually the driver of that goal screen. Because it pulls all the goals for that particular sprint of this particular day. So it's kind of interesting. Like I have to like re-architect the core data component to better reflect the data that should be there on that view.
Well, that should be pretty straightforward. I mean, especially at this stage, you can just change the model.
This was the thing when I was trying to do the review screen. It was like too soon because we hadn't figured out this architecture question, how the sprints work.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things where this is like a conversation for later, for like offline. But this is the type of challenge that in a larger context, like sometimes when you're building a view, you forget like you're trying to remember. You forgot the overarching vision of like what that view is ultimately representing.
Well, as Apple recommends in their SwiftUI video, like their really famous one from a few years ago was data flow. Yeah. Like you should, when you're looking at a view, you got to think, what data do I need for this view? Yeah. And you also want to break it down. What I started doing was really trying to break things down smaller and smaller pieces. The smaller you go in SwiftUI with the views, the easier it is to reason about everything. And you just have to choose how you get data into those views. But you really want the view structs, that you're building to be kind of self-contained, as much as that's possible. And so you want to isolate where the kind of mutating stuff is coming from. And there's different patterns for doing that. In our app, it's mostly we're kind of the highest level is we're kind of getting the data and then we're passing it down. That's mostly how we're doing it. But you don't have to do that, especially because we have core data. So if it's a read-only view, it can kind of make sense to just pull it directly. Depends on your situation, and what's happening. That's the beauty of having a big old database.
I mean, for our intents and purposes, like we're not. I mean, CloudKit aside, which is kind of mostly in the background, we're not
CloudKit. CloudKit.
We're not
CloudKit
really
actually is a pain in the butt a little bit because it breaks all the time on my simulator.
We're not trying to pull anything proactively from the network. Like we don't have we're not doing any serious server related interactions.
No, we're just pulling from core. So it's a pretty typical pattern. You'd see some kind of cache that is driving your screens, and then that cache gets updated some other way. Either when the screen loads, I mean, this is not how we're doing it, but this is how I've done it before without core data. The screen loads, you make the request to get your data, you pull it from the cache, and then you make the network request to refill the cache with any updated data. I've actually been looking at how the hell to do that with core data, efficiently, like what's a good pattern for that. But what we're doing is it's mostly user-generated data, and as much as anything comes from the internet, it's coming from the CloudKit sync. So that's happening like in the background. And then we're just pulling the screen data from core data directly, usually through fetch request property wrappers, which is pretty convenient and something I've been doing a lot of research in property wrappers lately. But that's like possibly for another episode. But yeah, so it's and you were working on the gesture to get that. So because like the core thing of the iPhone version too is that big gesture, which I don't think I've seen other places. The concept that we're going for, which is kind of like, I don't know, we're trying to make it more playful, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of like, it's a known, it's an understood mechanic. So I wanted to just sort of let it make it easy for the users to just get in and do the thing, and then because I'm sure they don't have that many habits that they're trying to track.
Well, that's our design assumption is that you're going to use this for a handful of really like important things, and then you're going to use other tools for your actual other tasks and projects and stuff.
And I'm going to be on the assumption, and this is the sort of like no A/B testing happening. This will have to be dark foodie. Is that you're doing this on the train when you have time in the grocery line, whatever. Just going, okay, did I do that?
We'll probably put a watch extension when we get this working too.
Sure,
for the same reason.
Like I don't want you to stay too long in the iOS version of the iPhone version. I should stress. Where it might become more powerful is that you can extend that out to like maybe then you can, when you have time, when you're sitting on a couch and maybe you have your iPhone or your iPad, ideally in that context, you can kind of review it there and be like, okay.
I think if we do a third app that also has this gesture in it, that's just going to be obvious that that's like our pattern. Because like the other the Kaji one was a little swipe gesture left and right.
We're known.
Now we're doing it again.
We're doing like the Tinder swipe team.
Thematic element of everything we do has to have this gesture in there somewhere.
Oh no!
I just realized this. But no, it's not a pattern until we do it 3 times.
Oh, that's true. So okay, there we go.
So right now
it's
just
do the AR version.
Oh god, the AR version we swipe with your hand.
Well, remember when we were joking about the AR Tinder?
Yes. See, we always think about this freaking gesture. Maybe because it's a useful gesture. Maybe because we just like, I don't know. I don't like Tinder.
I just thought it was hilarious that just like you would you would look at somebody through your AR goggles or glasses or whatever, and you would look at that. You would get like a social graph of this person, and just be like, it'd be like social. Was it this? It'd be like what's that? Black Mirror, where you like you look at their social graph, and then you get a rating and a score. Like it'd be like your credit score, but like for dating. And be like, okay, that's a this guy is a 55 swipe to the left.
Well, nope. I think it's Cory Doctorow wrote a book. I think it was it Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, something like that. Something with the Magic Kingdom. He wrote this story a long time ago, and the story takes place in like the future where everybody has like that. They have everybody's virtually immortal for various reasons. Anyway, but they all have like a number, which is like your equivalent of your wealth, and it's all based on reputation and stuff. And it's portrayed as this great thing, but then when you think about social credit scores and how they're actually implemented in the world and are increasingly implemented in the world, it's pretty terrifying. But but also think about when we thought about that issue. I think Facebook. I think you might have still been able to get social graph information. Do you remember how much information you could get from these Facebook API back in the day when they first launched it? You could just get an entire social graph of somebody. I mean, like you get a lot of information about people, and it was exploited, so they shut it down. But
I mean, you think about it from a context of like if you can get an AI to slurp up all the social related graphs, like what it understands of you online, and then generates based on your feedback of like I'm into Sagittarius, people who like long walks, blah 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 blah. Give me does this person match my criterias of these things, right? And then it'll just go online and then comes back with like here, a rating or something. It's like, yeah, maybe.
I remember in what was it?
You have a 60% chance of marrying this person. Yeah, it's just like one of those. I mean,
you're describing what we used to call those like intelligent agents or something like back in the day. Like,
they're described as bad app ideas.
yeah. But no, I mean there was. I remember even I think in the 90s and the idea of we're gonna have these little agent programs that go out and get stuff for us from the internet and
sure.
So it makes sense. But to wrap up the actual PickleJarTodo, is it just the Tinder swipe gesture you significantly updated?
Yeah, so I got it functionally working. I mean, the style still needs to be tweaked, but like if we shipped it with just this, it wouldn't be such a bad problem. It wouldn't fit the comps, but then like part of when you do wireframes, aka comps, it's never going to be a one-to-one. You just have to think of them like concept art and move on.
Yeah, and then so the next thing we have to fix is that's how the sprint works.
Yeah, I think one thing that's holding all of us back, I think, is trying to decide how we want to define sprints. Is sprints not priority, but is it a core component of this whole thing working? And if that's the case, maybe we need to default it to some. Like you have to have this sprint at least, like a default sprint.
Yeah, I mean,
optional or not.
Yeah,
I've seen other apps. I don't know if I've seen the sprint. Maybe they're in there, but I know that habit tracker apps generally you have to pick you can pick the days you would do things, that kind of stuff. But do they often work in sprints? I don't know. That was kind of one of our ideas to do it that way. I don't see why it's all that difficult to implement in the model. It doesn't have to be anything more than like a
you can just
relationship.
Or are you going to force the user to pick, or are you going to pick some default, or just some open-ended thing? Like if they don't pick anything, then it's just like there's one sprint and it's forever.
That is what I was thinking. Something straightforward, because I personally I like to do like the Kanban style development style usually, because I don't really like doing the sprint Scrum type of thing. So yeah, I would think that by default,
infinite deadlines.
Yeah, but no, I think that's a good question about whether it should. I think it should be an option, I guess. Mm-hmm. But it's a good question. The onboarding should probably suggest a sprint, because the whole point of this is to try to time box it. So if we had, like, for instance, we had this app working, then we could pick a sprint that allowed us to time box our development on it so that we would get it done. So like, we
built an app to force us to finish the app.
Yes, that's what I'm telling you. So I think since Sprint is such a important concept that we had since the beginning, I think we should probably make sure it's in the onboarding, and then As for what to do to just get stuff to work, I mean, you could probably have. Can't you have a sprint that's indefinite?
Technically, it's in the onboarding. We just haven't wired the onboarding to the like when you first open up the app, right? So if we get that working, that'll resolve all this. So maybe that'll be my next step.
We need the preview data to include it. That's all for us to move forward. You don't need to.
Sure.
I mean, we need the onboarding to work, but like,
that's the challenge. The challenge with the preview data. I don't know if the preview data. We need the preview data to pre-add a default sprint.
Yeah, we just have to add a sprint or a couple of sprints into that data creation. So we should just expand that. That right now it's just like one method. So the way we talked about this in the podcast before, but when using core data and using Swift UI and you want to use the previews for things, you need to get the data from somewhere. So we have a function on the data controller, the core data controller, that just spits out an in-memory only sample context. Sample context. So so then you can just put whatever you want in there, and then you can use that for your previews and stuff. So we just update that code, maybe add some different functions for that to get specific types of patterns of data that we might need. And that's an easy way of getting the data into your previews. And then you just add it to the environment, and you add the preview view context to your previews. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful.
Well, the thing is, like, I'm actually testing in simulator just so that I can, I tend to do that more than I do rely on the live preview.
Because you still using Intel, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. That and I want to get it closer to real world experience without having to put it on device. But just
you can still use that as a data source, though.
Yeah.
We just need to a way. You need to inject it. We need to figure out how to inject it more easily.
So I think my goal for next sprint is to actually do that integration, or at least set the onboarding so I have a pathway for which then we can get a full experience of starting. Because I think I've noticed some weird edge cases of weirdness in the interactions. I feel like that'll resolve a good chunk of that flow, because then I can just finish up the goal screen. Easy peasy.
Yeah, I mean I don't think the model should be all that complicated. I mean, I'll review it too.
Sure.
But we're trying to do the same thing a lot of other apps have done. So in terms of the modeling, for most part, except where I think we're I don't know how many do the sprint thing. I haven't tried out the latest contender in this.
We might need to figure out a better copy or a better name than sprint, because that feels very
iteration cycle. I don't think sprint necessarily is the verbiage we put in the UI, because I don't think people outside developers really think that way.
Just let user put their own name.
Yeah, and just call it it's a cycle of some sort.
Yeah,
you have to describe it somehow. It's like a time box. You can call it time box. I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's
but it's like a cycle, right? Like ultimately, it's a
we're thinking about that way because we're thinking that you keep doing it, but it's also like if you're just doing a habit, maybe what we want to do is at the end of the sprint, you review it, and then you decide if you want to do another one.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly if the concept of doing another one is embedded in the model for the sprint, or if it's just I'm just going to create another sprint, which is what I think we would do. Just create another sprint. And so therefore, it doesn't need to be considered something that repeats. It just really needs to be considered a time box where at the end of it you review and decide what to do next. So I don't know what the words will be, but we'll figure something out. But probably not sprint, as Aaron says, because nobody understands that. I mean, they'll think we're just all about running really fast.
Well, I mean, also if you're in our development or corporate environment, you or anyone who's dealt with Jira.
Yeah, I've been recently on Jira.
Then sprint is kind of it has that connotation. I don't know if I want to reflect that.
Yeah, I've been on the I made a Jira project.
How are you enjoying the Jira?
It's not bad. I mean, there's stuff I like about it and stuff I don't. And this is like a whole tangent now, but so I won't go too much into it because could be a whole episode, and I've only just begun. But I got access to create a team managed project. The team is just me. Because I'm the only one doing an iOS app. So I got a team managed project, and I started playing around with all the settings in there. pretty good. There's some stuff that the way that Jira is architected that are inexplicable to me. That like, why is it architected so you can't change the issue type without doing this workflow that moves items, and like, or you can't just change like every other system I ever used, you have something like labels on it or a type of thing. You can just change it on the item. Like, you just change it. No, you can't do it, Jerry. You have to like go through this workflow where you it like has to batch modify stuff. It's slow, and yet it's multiple screens. It's weird. I'm like, why is it implemented that way? It must be something with their underlying architecture. But the ability though to really like cater the workspace and the boards and the types and everything to just what I want, that is actually cool. Like, it's a level of flexibility I haven't had before. I've had not quite enough flexibility. Now I have way more than I need, but I'm not going overboard on it. So far, okay.
I look forward to your continued progress with Jira.
I mean, look, the other people at work have used Jira more, and they've had a negative experiences with it and positive experiences. So it's a tool. It's like the industry standard tool. Whatever. It's probably about time I got exposed to it. It's warts and all. But it's at least it works. I mean, unlike like other tools that are just kind of broken now that I have to use. It works.
That's fair. That's
better than other stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a type of tool, and then we'll drop this for now. I think it's a type of tool that is definitely very complicated. It or can be, and you have to be disciplined in how you configure it and use it. And I can totally see many ways in which an organization adopting this makes mistakes because it's very easy. I think the approach to take it is slowly and without like going too fast and messing with stuff, and just kind of very piecemeal. It's like what I did when I first started using Fogbugs many years ago. I was like, okay, take it out of the box. What does it do out of the box? I find a point that it doesn't quite work for me, and okay, how do I configure this one little thing to work better? And then I do that, and then and that's how I think you have to look at Jira. Just be very ginger with it. Just don't push it too hard. It won't bite you.
I love this positive perspective. I do. I'm looking forward to further updates on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I've used so many tools and they're all terrible. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, the upside of Jira is that the flexibility is actually something I've wanted. Mm-hmm. What I really want is if we could just use GitHub projects, that basically solves like 90+% of what I want. But we can't. We don't use GitHub. We use GitLab internally, and GitLab does not have that, at least yet, in the version app. So
sure.
And and it is what it is. And I've used other stuff. I've used RT. If you ever heard of that, that's terrible. Used Fogbugs, which used to be great, but it's kind of gotten crappy, as we talked about before on here. I've used lots of stuff over the years, and it's like, you know what? There's something to be said that we all just use the same crappy tool, because then when the jobs start flowing in, there's less onboarding training. We all know how to use it.
This is how you ensure job security. When you go look for your next job, you're like, I have Jira experience.
I mean, honestly, that was one of the reasons why people in management, I think, wanted to do it.
Oh no!
In industry, you got to remember, enterprises.
I manage Jira. That is the job title, Jira manager. Jira
no. I'm saying people. No. I'm saying people in management would. One of the considerations for using Jira is probably that it is an industry standard product, so it is something that you can expect people to have some familiarity with. That's actually, I talked about this before, it's actually a reason why you'd want to pick a tool, or one of the considerations for a tool, if you're talking about a big enterprise-y organization, is this a tool that's really bespoke that nobody knows, or is this a tool that everybody knows, and even if they hate it, they know how to use it? We're talking like the enteprises are different than smaller places.
I get it.
I get it too. And it's bad for you if when you're working day to day and the tool you don't like. But there's a logic to it.
I look at it in the context of like every enterprise app that I've known, and maybe we can go off out of this. But every enterprise app that I've known has never done in service. The people who buy this app or this product never actually uses it. Like it's all the people down below the org chart that has to suffer
to a large degree
and deal with the pain and the slowness and the griminess and the jankiness and the I'm just gonna
but you got to remember Koto, from your perspective in the mines, the Jira mines, you don't necessarily see the features that are used, even if only a little bit, by people higher up in the org chart, and that are the reason it exists in the organization. Like there's quite possibly things that it does that you never use, that they just are not available in other products, or you know what I mean. So like this happens a lot with enterprise stuff, where it's like it's because it's an enterprise thing, it does something that you and I would never need to use, but somewhere in the organization they need it, and that one person.
I know exactly what it's used for, and a lot of it is razzle dazzle. Here's a pie chart. Here's a bar chart. Here's some stupid chart that, because I, the developer, had fed into that chart, right? Because I put my stupid story in, boom, 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 done the tasks. Task is QA'd, and then the chart goes up, the bar goes up. Everybody's happy because there's this perceived like, oh, we're making progress, because these stats and lies, remember, it just makes you feel good, right? There's some dopamine effect, very similar to like social media networks.
But I mean, you do, and we should have a whole thing about this stuff, because I would love your advice about how to use Jira effectively, and like what do you do with stories and stuff like that? How do you write them?
Here's how you use it effectively. You just don't use it.
Don't use it. Yeah. Okay. Well, how do you use anything? Because you're still going to be writing the same kinds of things.
I know.
But the charts and stuff. I mean, again, it is important, because there's like politicking that goes on in enterprises. Sure. Everybody knows this, and you have to present information to people in different levels of organization who are not going to be as, technical as you are as a developer or something. Like, you need to have some way of abstracting certain questions, the answers to certain questions, into a form that people can understand. That's why you have presentation, like PowerPoint presentations, and that's why you want to have fancy charts and stuff. So again, that's what I mean. We may not use it. We may think it's kind of dumb, and maybe it is dumb for our day-to-day job. It wouldn't help us. But somebody else who has like more control of the money, for instance, might look at those charts like, oh great, here's more money. So you don't know how this stuff's going to be used. You have to, it's a big organization, you got to try to have some trust in your management that hopefully they're doing their job while you're doing your job, and then it all works out.
I have internal trust in my management. My problem is sometimes the challenge is, I think it's just a broad spectrum of like, we spend so much time feeding into that beast.
Yep.
And then when my struggle is like, okay, do we actually does this actually get the results we need, or are we just making busy work? Right?
Correct. I mean, I'm not saying there's not a lot of dysfunctional use of these products, including Jira especially.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
Especially when I have to read novel like stories in my stories.
Oh, you're gonna have to tell me about that later, because so I mean, I'm also in a different place where, as I said, most of our projects right now are literally one or two people in them.
You know what? Why don't we
we're starting small? You
know what Jira should do? Just since we're going to transition to this anyway, why don't we Jira can just say, okay, let the user make this long-winded story, and then have Jira go, okay, now summarize this so that actually is concise and makes sense, versus like I'm reading like a long-winded poetry.
So that brings us into, I guess we're revisiting the topic of AI, which is the term I hate so much.
What term would you prefer?
I don't know. It's a good. I mean, machine learning is slightly better. My problem with the term AI is that there's no intelligence, but then it gets to a philosophical question of what is intelligence. So then you go down a rabbit hole about that. But I don't like it, because I think it's a word that is just super loaded with hype, and people who don't understand what the actual technology is under that broad umbrella. I think it's a word that really generates fanciful ideas in people's heads.
Does it fall in the same way like Web3 does? Where
it was like Web3. That was obnoxious too, because it was like, this is the successor to Web 2, which was also obnoxious because that was the successor to Web 1. It's like, it's a marketing term, and often I think the way it's used anyway.
Sure.
So right now things are called AI. Like anything even remotely within the realm of like machine learning, artificial intelligence research, the use of certain technology, it's all kind of put on this broad umbrella. And it's a convenient brand. And it means that you can build tools, and I'm not saying they're not useful, but you could build like a useful tool, and then you're going to call it AI, just like you would call things, like Web 2 back in the day, Like it's just it annoys me. It's not really that important of a thing. I don't think it's not the most important thing in the world. I just it's like a pet peeve of mine that things are called AI and the certain vocabulary used in the space. But we're revisiting this, I guess, because even though we did this a few episodes ago, but the hype machine has just gone through the roof because we have GPT-4 has come out. Bing I got access to Bing, so I got to use that recently, and we wanted to talk a little bit about how we can use them today, right? How we can use, what tools can we use like right now? If you're an Apple app developer, like what can you do, right? What's available right now from Apple, from elsewhere, and what have we seen just in the recent weeks, maybe, right?
Sure.
That we think is pretty cool. So where do you want to start with this?
I guess we can kind of start with the basics of like the ChatGPT style of,
which is a large language model, like transformer stuff.
One of the things that they do allow you, although I'm not entirely sure how the pricing model works, is they allow you to have they give you a way so that you can access it through an API. So you just sign up, get an API key. There's tons of demos of that online. Azam actually has one too, so shout out to you, Azam Muhammad.
Yes.
So it's relatively straightforward to make your own ChatGPT.
So the API is to ChatGPT. Or is it to the mod?
It's to, I believe it's to OpenAI. I don't know if it's GPT-4 or GPT 3.5.
They do have
They have both.
They have both.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think 4 is a little bit more limited or something. You definitely have to pay for it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm a little unclear.
Right.
But what I'm saying is it just like an API access to the ChatGPT app that uses this model, or is it like more general access to the model itself?
There's 2 different pricing tiers.
Okay.
So you get the chat API, or there's like the language model API, which is you would have to do a lot more work to customize.
But that's
the input.
Right. So for most of us, we would just use a chat one because that can get some useful stuff out of it. But if you were doing something really specific, also the version 4, ChatGPT 4 can do images, right? So I haven't seen if that works yet on the API. I don't know.
I mean, I think
that would be cool.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just saying it does image-based stuff. Like you saw in the demo, they took a picture of a sketch and it turned it into a quote-unquote fully working web page, and I was just rolling my eyes so hard at that demo. But it was it really impressed people. I mean, it's not unimpressive, I guess, but it's like that's a web page. Like,
I mean, I was experimenting with it the other day
with the API.
With the API, with the generic, like, probably I'm sure it's 3.5. It's just a generic ChatGPT free version, and I asked it to give me allow me to do something that I probably could find on Stack Overflow, but I just chose to do it this way, where I said, "Hey, can you give me an NS predicate of a date range?" Right, which is something I'm sure I could figure out on my own through Google search and because it's the kind of thing I've done before, but I just don't remember it.
Yeah,
and it gave me a decent code snippet to start with, for which then I can refine to provide better context. Now, if you wanted to get further into having it do that work for you, you can prompt it. You can provide a better prompt, and this is where the art and the science kind of meet in terms of like you have to word it in a way that ChatGPT can go, okay, I get the context of what you're trying to get now, right? So I think I asked it to give me do that NS core data. I have an NS core data core context, and I just want to get an NS predicate of a start date and an end date, and then do that in the Swift UI context. So it created a fetch property fetch request property that was, I haven't tested it. That was the other thing too. It's like, okay, now based on this whole context, this whole Swift UI view with this fetch request, can you give me a unit test on that particular fetch request? And it gave me one to start. I mean, it was pretty verbose in that sense, and there are some bugs that I had to fix. Again, I didn't test this completely because of my stance on tests in general, but aka I'm lazy. But the funny thing is, like, it had the ability to do that, and I know a lot of friends who are testing this right now to create to just get a sense of like, oh, I know I want this general workflow. I have a general idea of like what I'm trying to build, like in Go, for example, or in Python. And I just want to build something like some scaffolding to like construct it. Yeah. If you can provide it the proper context, it can provide you with at least a good starting point.
Right. And that's what we found last time we were talking about this with Copilot and ChatGPT before 4 came out. But you said you're using the API. Are you like querying the API, or are you just going to the web page?
Oh, no, going to the web page.
Okay, so you're not like using the API per se yet.
No.
But even so, and I have done this with Bing because I'm like lazy. I wanted to access GPT-4, and I know Bing does that. So I went and Mohammed Fani, right? He's been on the podcast before. He's been doing a lot of research in this. He's been working on playing around with these tools. And so I think he was doing Bing. I was like, oh, I'm going to give it a shot. So I thought I was going to have to be on a waiting list or something. But no, I just signed up, just logged in with Edge, and it just worked. I was like, okay, and it just gave me access. So I started playing around with it, and I'm pretty sure, like, if you put it into creative mode, there's like 3 modes for Bing, that if you put it in, like, creative mode, that's using 4. I'm not sure about the other ones. There's like a middle mode, and then there's like another mode. And it basically comes down to how like verbose it is and how much, like, quote unquote imagination it's allowed to take. Again, all these metaphorical words annoy me with talking about software algorithms, but it's pretty cool. I used it for some code and for some other stuff. So the other stuff I used it for was ad copy for something, and it made decent enough copy. It was very generic, like it wasn't what I would write, but it was generic and a little bit of modification. It was actually used somewhere. It was like, it's fine. I used it to, and what it did, what was useful in Bing specifically, which makes Bing interesting over the regular ChatGPT, is that it will incorporate search results. So when I asked it to do stuff like create me ad copy for this event with this like organization, so I don't, and like it went to the web page and got like context from the web page and added that in. So as you said, the prompt engineering, kind of some of this happens on Bing, by itself. And so it went and it got the information from the web and then combined it and then created some output. So very useful in that respect, especially if you wanted to like summarize things. It'll give you like bullet points. I mean, usually I can tell that it's just basically regurgitating what it found on the web, but sometimes in like a more fluent kind of text though. But that it brings in that other context of what makes Bing interesting. Compared to regular ChatGPT, which I don't know how much it does that at all.
I mean, to be fair, in that sense of like exploration, like if you asked it to do, if you provided the proper amount of context, right, that it can work with, and then adjust that context. One of the things that's actually kind of fascinating is as long as you're in the same session, you can ask it follow-up questions to do extra things like. Can you add comments to this code in the Doxy style? Right?
Do you know what the window is on Bing? They actually tell you, like, they have a number that counts down. I think it's 15, and that's like how many messages I think you can do in one session before you have to create a new one. Like they really limited the context window,
right?
Which is probably for the best because you can give you crazy results if you go too long,
right? So I think that one of the things that I've realized about it though is like if you're asking for a pseudo source, if you're asking it for a source of truth, right? You better damn well know the general like whether or not you can like falsify that or you can what's the term? You know the context of the
where it's getting its answer from.
Yeah, not even getting its answers. Like you can test it basically. You can say whether or not this is like the obvious example is like when you ask it a math question, it's 9 out of 10 times it's going to get that wrong, because or basic math question like 2-digit number times 2-digit number, right? Because it's that variation isn't so prominent out there in the world.
It's generally it's not really doing the math. Yeah,
right. It's not grokking that math. You
need to double check the results. The accuracy of this stuff is really suspect. But I did do some code generation with it too. I was working in core data stuff. I've been looking at property wrappers, and I was like asking Bing again, like, can you like tell me how do I combine like a fetch request with like API access, like HTTP API access, and in a property wrapper, and it didn't give me anything particularly useful, but it did give me like plausible looking code. But what's great about Bing is it tells you its sources, so I knew where it got it from, because it got it from, believe it or not, Donnie Wall's article, blog post. Donnie Wall's who wrote the core data book that I like. So what I like about Bing is that it's really transparent about where it gets some of its stuff from, and it's like, if you'd like to do more, you can go over here.
Well, I think that opens up an interesting question, right? Like if the links are from sources that are like, I suspect sometimes they might be old, or they might be or like they might not necessarily be so it maybe like the code style is quite different from like the modern, like Swift changes, and particularly Swift UI changes fairly dramatically year over year. Either they add new things or they deprecate a lot of things. So
I remember I did ask it to do something once. I was like, okay, it gave me some snippets, and I was like, do it in async await style or whatever, and it did try to do that a bit. So I mean, and I'm saying Bing is different because it does search the web, like the current web, as far as I understand, like it gets that context. So maybe that's why it worked a little better. I didn't try the same query. I should do that. I should try the exact same query in ChatGPT and Bing and compare the results, even though it's not apples to apples exactly, but it could be interesting. It could be instructive.
Like, I think one of the easy ones to know whether or not it's using the modern model, which I assume is like past 2021, which I think 3.1 model is still like locked in 2021 data sets, is whether it understands actors in Swift. Actually, this one says so it's kind of one, and then you have to double check, right? And so that's some of this stuff is very regardless of whether or not the model gets better over time, you still have to understand the domain, the knowledge domain, to even understand whether or not you can trust it, in a sense, right? Yeah. Of like, if you don't have a good knowledge domain, sometimes you might be over dependent on these kind of AI assistants, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Well, Bing definitely knows, because it searches the web, even on the middle option. It knows that it gave me back, regurgitated an answer about what actors are, but at least it knew. Which goes to show you, I think, that the power of these models is not just the model itself. I think it's when you combine it with other tools, and that's what Microsoft has really been doing. Sure. And I know we're trying to focus on stuff you can use as a programmer, but I think you should look at what they're doing with what they call it, Microsoft Copilot, which is like their Office version of this, because that is an implementation that a big company can do that we can't do. But it is combining a lot of multiple things. It has like this middleware layer, and it has some kind of like graph of your data, and then it also has an LLM, which I think is GPT-4, and then however they train that to tweaked it, and then it does like some processing in the middle to like send and then so the prompt you give it for stuff you're doing goes through this other processing, goes back to the LLM, comes back, and then they process it some more, and then sometimes they send commands out directly to the apps, like in Excel or Word or something, and sometimes it depends on what you're doing, but it's that middleware layer is what is making it, I think, potentially really useful. Now, of course, it's only in very limited preview, and they've only done some preview videos which don't really give you a realistic sense of it, but pretty cool, like integrating that into the apps. That's like a potentially going to give you like more superpowers at work.
I mean, I guess it's kind of like, I think when we talk about like how we as app developers can take advantage of it, one of the things that I find interesting is like Apple and to some extent Google, and Google and Apple have already been working on this for a long time before AI was a big hype, right? So like image object detection.
I think it's Vision Framework, isn't it?
Right, the Vision Framework does a lot of that, where you can identify people, like this whole masking thing that's happening right now in our Zoom call, right? That's people detection, right?
And
there, right?
It used to be you had to train yourself. Now, like over the years, Apple keeps adding these pre-trained models into their operating system. So now you can you can recognize people and faces and objects. You can recognize text on stuff.
Right.
You can, and then it's easy to train for additional stuff with the Core ML, Create ML tools.
Like the whole cool. Like taking a person out, like you take a photo and you can. Like, you can like long press to like on a person, and then that creates a sticker, of them that you can add. You can put in your messaging app. That's AI. If you're talking, I mean, quote unquote AI. If you're talking,
I don't know. Is there? I don't know. Is there programmatic? There's not really programmatic access to it, but it just. I don't think right, but it just works everywhere that.
There's like programmatic access. Yes, there is a way to use something where you use use Vision to identify the object. I was actually playing with sample code the other day where you can change the background because you can now mask them out using a combination of Vision and Metal to like create sort of a new blend mode.
But like you don't is there an API to be like grab the most prominent person in this photo? So it is an API accessible.
It comes back as an array of different that's cool of something, but
because that's one of the coolest features of the latest iOS version that I use was I actually use that to make an image for for something. Like I needed the people in the image yanked out of it, right? And I was like, I'm not really Photoshop expert, and I didn't want to have to deal with that. And I just like, it was just going to work good enough, and it did. It was good enough for what I needed.
I think the other thing too is like you can do stuff like I kept thinking like in one of the secret sauces for developers in general, third-party developers, would be whatever data model you create, right? So you can use CreateML, which is if you're an Apple developer, you can use CreateML to create these data models that are very specific. So I always refer back to like that whole like anime generated brouhaha about a group of visual effects artists who basically wanted to make their own anime but didn't want to do all the
Corridor Crew guys.
Yeah, the Corridor Crew guys. They didn't want to but their experience is much more in the visual effects side of things. So they're really good visual effects artists, and that's their context of understanding the world and how they create stuff. So how do you they've been experimenting a lot with generative art to sort of optimize this idea of creating a custom, well, in their case, they just basically ripped a ton of images in Vampire Hunter D, which is an old anime from like the 90s or the 80s and then the 90s. But anyway, and then sort of put that into a data model for which then they can create these images of themselves. Basically, they're them acting out these scenes where they still have to buy the costume, they still have to act out the scenes, they still have to do the green screening, the camera effects, all that stuff. So the production value doesn't change; it just works better with their workflow to produce the anime that they ended up producing. But and even that still has issues, but it's one of those things where it's a fascinating process. I mean, controversy aside from the data model source, there's nothing to stop you as the artist or the art crew to create your own custom data model for which then you can feed it back into a stable diffusion for which to help for example create, let's say you wanted to create you didn't want to bother with so much line art now, and you of course people pay a ton for in between artists. You can, and this is where sort of the controversy gets into play. You can now create animation that says, okay, maybe I have this frame, this pose, and this frame, and this pose. Like a person about to punch and a person finishing the punch, right? you should be able to create a model that can do the in-betweens of that. Not great, but reasonable enough to have a starting point for which then you can further refine it.
Yeah.
And hopefully save time. The caveat is like, depending on your cost of production, maybe that can be enough for you to do a reasonable flow. And again, like, this goes back to, like, there are people who are, this is the type of thing that has the potential of, like, oh, you now removed a ton of jobs, but usually these are not great jobs.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, payment.
Yeah. And for right now, it seems like, as a developer, the biggest, like, the easiest use cases are code snippet generation through various ways, right? And using, like, existing vision framework, core ML stuff, and like the diffusion models for image generation. And, like, that seems the biggest thing. But I think the code generation thing is the thing that is the most immediately applicable, because it can apply to a variety of coding scenarios. One of the things I haven't tried, but I saw that, I think Meng To did a post about building this animation, and I would like to try that to get help with doing animation, because I'm not the designer animator guy. So if it can help me to develop an animation that kind of works, that'd be cool, because, you know, it's the model has all of this you know, example code in it about how to do different kinds of animations. So I bet that my idea will be in there somewhere.
I would hope
extrapolatable.
I would hope that it encourages experimentation.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. So like the speed at which you can go from an idea in your head to workable code, even if it's not great, that's where I see the real advantage is right now.
Sure.
Like, because it's like, okay, I want an animation to make a car do a little sparkly thing like the Meng To thing. I don't know where to begin, because I'm not real familiar with those APIs. But the interface provided by these, like the ChatGPT style apps, lets me just ask and then get back usually some reasonable facsimile of usable code. Maybe sometimes very usable code. And then I can take that and play with it, and then it helps me to rapidly, or theoretically, I haven't tried this yet, but it should help you to theoretically rapidly learn. And also just rapidly, and if you integrate this into tools, and I'm sure this is, I mean, Copilot from GitHub is one of the examples of this, then you should be able to, while you're in your coding workflow, just generate the stuff in context, you know. And so over time, as you were talking about context earlier, over time, you should be able to, as these tools get better integrated into environments where, like, the IDEs and stuff are working in, then hopefully they get better, or GitHub Copilot gets better at giving you more useful little snippets of code, so you can just move faster from idea to execution. And I think that's great, because most of what you're doing or a lot of what you're doing as developers, you're, like, looking up stuff, you know, and trying to learn it and try to integrate that knowledge. And this is just another way to help you do that. I don't think it replaces anything that an actual software engineer does right now, but it can help speed up it, like, finding the answers.
Well, it's definitely not going to.
As long as you test.
It's definitely not going to do the build and run. It's not going to solve your CocoaPod problems.
No, it's not going to solve your architecture design problem. It's not going to do any of the hard stuff that you need a mind for. It's a token predictor. It's not like magic, even though it seems like that to a lot of people. But it's not without its utility.
No. I guess that's sort of the question mark in my mind of, like, how, because it goes back to one of my concerns. The digital artists particularly have had a ton of concern in terms of, like, it discourages a lot of people from putting art out there on Twitter, or
yes, it does,
because now you have to worry about, like, does this get slurped up in a model without my consent? And that's one thing, but also it's like an existential question, right? Like, what would make me special, right? That I can be employed for my particular skill if ultimately you can replicate it the moment I put it out there, right?
It's just like the idea of a programmer. I mean, I've heard this for many years. Like, you don't want to be a programmer. Programmer implies you're just a mechanistic workflow, that you're just writing code, but you want to be a software engineer. You basically want to be, what you're bringing to the table is all this context and knowledge and reasoning ability to be able to solve the problem. You're not just writing the code. Like, if the machine can write the code after you solve the problem, then you still have a job. You just can do your job faster. But if your job is to just if your job was data entry is an obvious one, or if you're like a really low level programmer, you're just like literally just, if you were just getting pseudocode and you were just translating it into a particular language, like as one-to-one as you could, like that job, which is not really a real job, I think, anywhere, but like that job could be eliminated by software. And so if you're like a visual artist and your job is like a low level visual artist, like I could see a lot of them being automated away. If you really, what your job is to, just as you said, like do the frames that someone else already designed in between. The problem with eliminating that stuff is it makes sense from an organizational standpoint, perhaps, if you could eliminate some of that. But then how do you get the training to get to the level where you can appropriately use these tools?
Sure.
As a programmer, I think we don't have that. That is not as much of a concern, because at least right now, the tools, you still have to understand how to ask the question. You still have to understand how to integrate the responses and test them and stuff. So I see it right now as maybe closing the loop of, as I said, idea to execution, to learn the contours of new APIs and stuff. I think there's some potential there for that. But I am with you about the visual artist concerns, because I feel like, a lot of what makes right now these tools just replace so much of the, or they can, in certain contexts, they can replace so much of the low level, like the entry level work. If I understand how a lot of the industry works, how do you get the training? Is my question. Like, how would you go? How would you rise up to a level where you could be the one who's inventing the character and then having the AI make the the middle frames?
I mean, that's the hard part, right? Because it's it's a lot of it's a passion endeavor, especially if you're doing character art or environment or anything targeted entertainment.
It's really have
consumption.
To think about the specifics.
Yeah, and so if it was like an architectural thing or something like that, maybe not such a big deal. But anything of self-expression, I think it's a challenge because it sort of somewhat attacks the heart of if what I do is replicatable, what is the value of what I do over time?
I mean, yeah, and I think you have to go up to another level of abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
So if your whole thing is I make characters, arts, pictures, well, maybe a lot of that whole industry gets automated away. Sure. because it's not that the output is necessarily as good. It's that if the output is good enough for the market that it's serving, then it might displace a lot. So then you need to think about, instead of just designing character arts, I need to do something else that incorporates characters.
I mean, artists will eventually evolve. I mean, that's how, when people complain about abstract art, it's like, well, that's where people were paying the money, right? So just these really absurd, it got to a point where it got so absurd you would pay money for a banana on a wall, because that actually has an ephemeral nature to it, right? It's
like NFT art,
or not non-replicatable. Well, that's I'm not surprised that ended up crashing, because all that's so replicatable. The moment something's replicatable, it's you can't enough. If you're not the first one and you're not the best one.
Yeah, but while it was in demand, right? As an artist, you could be like, I'm going to create the template that the program is then going to generate an infinite variety of to sell as NFT. So that's what I mean. Instead of saying I'm going to create, at first the NFTs was I think a lot of them were like, I'm going to create 50 variations by hand, and then quickly they realized, oh, you don't have to do that. We can automate this. That. Yeah. And so you still had an artist generally create the first template or whatever, and then the variations were automated in. So that would be, in my mind, an example of an artist going one step up in the abstraction layer, and still having work to do then.
Well, I mean, that reminds me of
that lasted for a week, right? How long NFTs last?
Yeah, I mean, the rate of speed of which it was easy to replicate. The moment the process is easy to replicate, then the value, and then you flood the market with crappy derivatives. your art exponentially drops down in terms of uniqueness, right? And the other thing is like, I think one of the things that's interesting that came out of it is like sort of the explosion of interesting generative art. I think that is sort of to me, I feel like that is the hidden gem in there, because generative art, the secret sauce is in the shader code. You could replicate that shader code if you knew how to do it, but that takes a specific style of a programmer needs to actually be able to reverse engineer that. And the artists who create that actually are legit artists, in the sense of like they know what is visually interesting, versus like and I think I thought that was interesting in terms of like you can repeat that code, you can repeat that art, that GIF or whatever all you want. The secret sauce is not that output. The secret sauce is in the code.
Yeah, but if the like Stable Diffusion can replicate the style of that artist,
sure.
Or you talk about I mean, can't they? It does not let you recreate it without understanding the. I mean, I guess you're talking about the ones that are specifically like the animated ones.
Sure, animated ones, the interactive ones, any of the ones that have, let's just say, that has animations, that have interactions to it.
Because these tools don't do animated stuff well yet, right?
No.
Or at all.
They can, but you'd have to almost do it frame by frame.
Right. So there you go. So that's an example of, as a developer, and if you're a developer artist type person like Kotaro here,
sure.
You could get into that.
I think it's the combination of like, if you were to use that and somehow the other thing is like the data model becomes something similar in that context, right? I think that's where I sort of realized, like when we talk about like secret recipes in the restaurant business or in the food industry, right? Like, that's not something you patent or you ever show off, right? It's just a secret recipe. It's hidden in a vault, right? The same type of thing with generative art or data model. It's like you want to keep your thing special, create the data model that is custom to your product, and that's what's going to be the secret sauce that nobody else can touch. In theory, I could be wrong there, but
yeah, I mean, I just wonder if it exists. It can be used as input into one of these models. Like, sure. I mean, how long can it be left available? If it's like a static, especially if it's an image or it's text or of some kind, it can be put into these existing models, and then look of it can be.
I think of it much closer to like if I had built a data model that is specific to a workflow, right? That improves a workflow, but I never release that, or I find some way to obfuscate that somehow. That's not available to the general public, right? I just built it, and I built it for a product, and we'll call it, AI animator or whatever, right? Then, that I think is where a lot of the opportunity, quote unquote, are in terms of like custom data models. To me,
yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, yeah, if you use these tools, like right now, we're all just playing around with these models that they're all pre-trained, and they do what they do, and it can do a lot. Sure. But they do what they do. But if you can take these models, and that's where I said Microsoft has taken it. That's where Bing and Microsoft Copilot come from. That's where GitHub Copilot comes from. That's where these systems that are built on top of them. And as app developers, we're much more restricted in what we can do. Because we're not millionaires with like server farms to maybe run the models ourselves. But what we can do is access and I think there's just an explosion of these like API, like SaaS services are going to become available. And I know, I'm sure I haven't looked, but I'm sure there'll be something on Azure that you can access to do things. And like, so you'll be able to build on top of these models to build all kinds of stuff and like tweak them to your own needs. Yeah. That's where the real value comes, because then it's like, then you're right. I mean, it's not. It's not just something widely available to everybody. It's something based upon your own data set and your own needs.
I mean, arguably, there are already data models within Apple, and Apple certainly provides other like third-party data models that you can rely on to do things like recognize hand signals or
handwriting, that's a great one,
or numbers, or like I think you can incorporate that into your product, your app.
They demonstrated that a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You could record. You could easily get some video. I think of you doing all kinds of activities, dancing or exercising. They do one on exercising, and then you can have your app recognize that, so it could be incorporated into an application, which is like an exercise tracker, for instance.
Sure.
So you can, and so like there's all kinds of stuff. It's like these tools can really help, I think, developers to be faster, but also just to build more complicated things. Like if we had to from scratch figure out how to do hand gestures. I mean, I remember when I looked into it before Apple released a pre-trained model, like built in, it was not easy, and you still had to find someone who had a whole library that had a model, and then you had to like try to pay for it and incorporate and stuff. And it was like, I'm not going to do this. And then like a year something later, Apple came out with something, and now it's just built in. It's just there. And that's what you're going to keep seeing this, because the big companies are all in on this. Mm-hmm. They're spending gobs of money on it. So they're going to keep incorporating this into the tools and the frameworks, the libraries that we have access to as at like the lowly level of an app developer. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this might be a new era where we just suddenly get, it's like in the earlier days of iOS, where it's like every release was just like incredible new features that we never had access to before. Like we got push notifications. We got, so it's, it'll be like that. It'll be like every year, maybe for a while, we'll just keep having these new things we can build stuff on. And that's exciting from an app developer standpoint.
I agree. I don't know, Aaron, what do you think?
Yeah. It's like, I don't know, we're kind of getting overtime on this stuff.
Right.
Yes,
our time manager here.
That was me. That was me trying to wrap up things.
Oh, my bad. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. Since we should wrap up anyway. You can learn more about Philly Cocoa at phillycocoa.org. There you'll find links to our Slack group, meetup schedule, and contact info. If you're feeling generous, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your podcast platform of choice is. And please share us with all your developer friends. And one more thing. After the upgrade, the world leaders asked again to the AI, "Is there a God?" The AI responds, "There is now." Right, one more. Or two more, actually. Scientists predicts human-level artificial intelligence by 2040. Maybe sooner if the bar keeps dropping.
That's pretty funny.
And finally, humans are being tested against the new AI program. The robot beats the human in every category. It comes down to one last one: hunting. The robot, again, beats the human. However, someone working there sets the animals free again and tells them to try to get them again. The robot doesn't move while the human wins because robots can't reCAPTCHA.
Oh my God. that was a long setup, but I like it. I like the payoff. We can't reCAPTCHA.
Till next time, good luck with your own developer journey. We will cheer for you always. I have Jira experience.